You're on the line with Jamal Meeks, former Indiana Hoosier, number 23, 1992. And I'm on the beat with Jim Coyle.
Today's guest is brought to you by Reynolds Family Dentistry of Sellersburg. You need $1 million smile for those championship photos, and that's exactly what you'll get with Reynolds Family Dentistry. Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat with Coy O'Leary here on this Monday. It's April 6th, joined now by Kyle Neddenriep from the Indianapolis Star. Kyle, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Well, we're getting by, man. It's a weird time for all of us, of course. You as well, a man who makes his living in sports also when there's no sports, difficult. But we got a little manna from heaven today as the Indiana All-Star team was announced.
Yeah, thank goodness. Had some good news to write about, and you know, I think a 13-player roster that, you know, has some good balance to it. You got some good size and you know, guys who can, you know, play the wing and some versatility, and then some guards who can really fill it up. So, you know, I thought when I saw the roster, it looked right to me, as much as you can, you know, get it right. I know there's always a few guys every year who probably have a good shot, who maybe should have been on the team, but it's always hard because I think all 13 of these guys are well accomplished and deserving players. And, you know, I know at this point probably there's probably little chance that they can play a game, but, you know, you'll always go down as an all-star, which I think is probably the most important thing of all.
Yeah, I think Todd Leary can speak to that. He knows the importance of doing that, being a former high school player in this state. It's just an honor.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I was so happy that you guys went ahead and went through with that and continued on with naming it, because you're exactly right. I mean, truly, 30 years later, nobody really remembers who won or who did whatever. You're just named as an Indiana All-Star, and it just is. It's one of those honors that you know, you can always take with you. You never forget. And it's a big deal. And I'm super happy that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago and whether they would go ahead and name the All-Star team if they thought they didn't have a chance of playing it. And that's just a credit to you guys. I'm glad that they went through and did that. Yeah.
Well, I know Todd knows this as much as anybody. When you walk into that gym and you see the jersey hanging up at the end of the gym, and you know, you go into, you know, so many gyms I've been into, and you know, I'm always curious. I'm a history buff anyway, and somebody who likes looking back at historical stuff. And you look at those jerseys, and then you want to find out more about, you know, I wonder what that guy did for his career, and it kind of makes you forever ingrained with that school that you played for. And you know, not that there aren't great players who aren't all-stars, and you know, you know, there's guys you look back in history and you wonder how the heck were they not an all-star?
For sure.
But, you know, but it happens. But, you know, for the guys who do get it, you know, again, you're kind of forever ingrained with that school. And I think that's really, like Todd said, I mean, that's what really being an Indiana All-Star, I think, is all about. It's not necessarily, I mean, you want to go beat Kentucky and you have a great time during that week or 2 weeks like it used to be. But I think the bigger thing is just, you know, being a part of that all-star, you know, forever.
Kyle, I don't think you could be more right, because that takes me back to my childhood. I'm walking into the gym at Floyd Central and seeing these pictures from these kind of old faded color pictures, but these guys were wearing this Indiana All-Star jersey, and it's like, wow, who is that dude? And you look that up and you find out, wow, these are some great players. But it's an honor, and it's an honor that goes back, and it's such a tradition way back in this state. But there's been so much talk about how much talent is in next year's class, Kyle. This class was not exactly devoid of talent.
No, it's a you know, when you look at this 13-player team, you know, I think it's probably not, if you go much past this, I think there's probably a few guys who had a good case. I'm actually, you know, as we talked here and you called, I was kind of writing a story about some of those guys who I think, you know, I hate to call it a snub list because that means somebody on the team wasn't deserving, but guys who had a good case. And I think there's a few of those, but if you get too much past, you know, 16, 17, it's probably not as deep of a class as next year's will be. And, I think there's that class is just unusually deep. The 2021 class is super, super deep. So that's maybe more of the exception than the rule. But when you look at this team's roster, I mean, you look at guys like, DeAndre Davis from Lawrence Central, who's going to Louisville, Trey Galloway, from Culver Academy. These guys, 6'5", 6'6", Anthony Leal, going to IU. Those all good, good size, scoring ability. And this class is probably a little devoid at the point guard spot. Nigel Pack is a really, really good one. He's probably definitely the best in this class, but as far as that goes, that's probably the only thing the depth at the point guard spot you're lacking a little bit. But you look at guys like Kyron Powell from Bosse, who's just a beast. He's not a super skilled offensive player, but man, he blocks shots and rebounds, and I think he'll be a really good college player playing his role. And then Tony Perkins, of course, has had a great year for Lawrence North. Going to Iowa, and I think they kind of snuck in there late and got a steal with Tony because his motor just never stops. So you look up and down, and of course Indiana Wesleyan, they're always sneaking in there, getting a guy maybe you wouldn't expect them to get, and then Tayson Parker from Northwestern, who is a big time scorer and an athlete. So a great job by Greg Tonigal there at Indiana Wesleyan. They always seem to end up with an Indiana All-Star, somehow, and that's why they're such a great program. But again, up and down the roster, I think this is a really good team. I think they did a good job picking this team, and didn't even mention, John L. Davis, who scored more than 2,000 points at Gary 21st, and another really good player who played well against 4A programs all season long. So, again, a good team. I think they did a good job picking this team. I didn't have any real, qualms, I guess, with any of the guys that were picked for this group.
Yeah, and you mentioned the point guard situation. Nigel Pack, obviously a really good one, but then you've got a unique situation with Christian Lander, who is attempting to reclassify, probably will, unless that falls through. So he's going to miss out on the opportunity this year to be an All-Star, then, of course, next year as well, unfortunately. And Mr. Basketball for a guy who had a really good shot at all of that, but he'll be giving that up.
Yeah, and I think when I was kind of thinking back to that, and, I guess you have to have your ducks in a row to be able to, sort of reclassify on the fly like that. Caleb Swanigan did that, and he ended up, he basically said between his, sophomore and turned out to be his senior year, he was going to graduate early. So that put him in the running for all this stuff. And he turned out to be Mr. Basketball that year. They ended up winning a state championship. And so he'd reclassified, kind of before the season started. In Christian Lander's case, as I understand it, there's still some things to be worked out as far as that goes. And, so he wasn't, as we went through this year, he was a junior basically. And you're right. I mean, he'd definitely be a guy who'd be one of those top 2 or 3 guys you'd put in the mix for Mr. Basketball, if not number 1. But if that comes to fruition, you kind of miss out on that. And the good thing is he gets to campus early and get started. But, we've seen that happen at times where guys have gone to prep school or whatever, and they've missed out on some of those things as seniors. And, that would be the case here. But, regardless, another guy who's had a great career, high school career, and, was named a junior All-Star this year and obviously very deserving of that honor.
Yeah, and then another thing I see, you got Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal, both on this team, both, of course, going to Indiana, part of a couple of guards coming in there to continue to revamp the roster overhaul for Archie Miller, but 2 really good ones that'll be playing in Bloomington hopefully next fall. Yeah,
and I think Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal are guys who can be a key part of that program. I don't think they're, guys who are going to come in there and light the world on fire or be big time, scoring a ton of points right away. But, guys, when you watch, how well these 2 guys were coached throughout their high school careers, Anthony Leal, you couldn't play for any better coach than J.R. Holmes has been over the years. And a guy who, when you talk to him, he's a great interview, very smart kid. Kind of understands the game, I think, really well, and played he wasn't a guy, he didn't have to go out and he had a really good team this year. He didn't have to force a lot of shots or he was a good teammate, I thought. And he'll go down as the all-time scorer of Bloomington South which is no small accomplishment. And then, Trey Galloway, does everything. He not only can score, he can rebound. He's a great passer, great defensive player. Just plays with a lot of energy and just plays hard. Just knows how to play hard. And he also set his school's career scoring record. And I think the one thing with Galloway, he's had the wrist injuries the last couple of years that have, he's kind of played through a lot of pain. So he's a tough kid, but his shooting, probably outside shooting, needs to improve some. But that's really the only real hole. I think he's a guy who's going to come in and do whatever you want him to do. I think you don't have any question he's going to give everything he's got to be whatever you want him to be as a player. So I think they're getting a hard worker in Galloway, and like I said with Leal, a really smart player who can shoot it and understands how to play.
Todd, do you really like his game?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think both of these guys coming in are going to have major contributions earlier in their career. And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to come in and average 20 like a Calvert Chaney or that, but I do think those guys will both have contributions right off the bat, and barring injuries, there's room for them to come in there and play already on the roster. So I agree with you in all of that assessment. What my first thought when this came out was, okay, what can they do to push the game back and make sure that they get an opportunity to play the actual all-star game? But the more you sit there and think about it, I mean, you alluded to it a minute ago, but it's probably very, very slim chance that they have the opportunity to play this game. Is that
I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah, I think the problem you run into is, they had to move the game this year because of the renovations at Bankers Life to Southport. And, now that the schools have closed, that almost makes that impossible to do in the time frame that you were planning to do the game. So, you take that into account. And then also the Kentucky All-Stars aren't even having their tryouts. So, I don't think they're going to be able to play. Now, they could name a team, kind of like, we do here, which would be different than they normally do it, because they normally have a tryout situation and then pick the team from that. And we have the top 100 here, but that's not necessarily a tryout situation. So,
right.
I think you're in kind of a tough window, because a lot of these guys, I've covered this game for 12 years, and I remember after, pretty much right after that Saturday game, guys are leaving the next day to go to their colleges. Now that's probably not going to be the case this year.
That's exactly my thoughts. I thought the exact same thing. Like, this is not something they can push back and have in July even, because I know a lot of these guys are even, maybe they were not going to be able to go to summer schools this year, but I know they're going to try to be on campus as early as possible. And yeah, this is just one of those games that I don't think they're going to have the opportunity to push back and play at a later date.
No, well, and Todd, a couple of years ago, even they switched it back to a Saturday, Sunday, and some of the guys couldn't even play on Sunday because they had to leave to get to school and start their classes and workouts and whatever that Monday. So that became a problem. So you're in that tight of a window. So I just don't know. I don't know what you can do other than put the game out, put the team out there, and then I'm sure at some point here I'm almost positive that the games aren't going to happen this year, and I don't necessarily have a strong feeling that it needs to, as much as it's not makes another thing that's not normal about this whole situation, but. I think the fact that the team has been named and all that, I think, is a good thing, and we might just have to live with that this year.
Yeah, true. The only thing with that, I agree with that 100%, because being 30 years removed from playing in that game, like I don't remember the game part of it hardly at all. Like it's the honor of being on the All-Star team and the other guys. I mean, that would be the cool part, is you get to see some other guys. AAU's different now, so these guys have probably all met each other and played at some point in time against each other. But the actual game itself is not the important part. It's the honor. I'm so glad that you guys went through with that and did that.
Kyle, the jewel yet standing out there, of course, Mr. Basketball yet to be awarded. And obviously there's a couple of guys who are probably kind of up at the top. Anthony Leal, of course, Trey Galloway, Tony Perkins, which some guys we've already talked about. But Indiana looking to land their third consecutive Mr. Basketball, which would be a first for them. They're in pretty good shot for that. I mean, I don't know who it's going to end up being, but I think that Anthony sure got a good shot at it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, and I haven't, we haven't nailed down exactly. The last few years we've done it at our spring banquet, which is obviously we're not going to have that this year. Would have been, I believe, May 2nd. So, but we're going to name it earlier than that. As far as the dates, I'm not sure yet, but don't know all the vote totals yet and who won. But I think when you look at it, honestly, I think Leal, has a good advantage because he's really the guy, Southern Indiana guy. And sometimes you see how this works where, if there's one region of the state, if there's two guys kind of competing against each other, say if Trey Kaufman would have been a senior this year, you could have two guys competing against each other for votes. I think this year Leal is kind of maybe the only guy in Southern Indiana, who would really get a lot of votes, and maybe Trey Coleman from Jeffersonville gets a few, but I think Leal will kind of dominate the vote there, and then I think Tony Perkins will get a pretty good support from Central Indiana. I think he's had the kind of year where he's deserving of that and led his team. As far as you could take him. That's another thing, too, is we didn't get to see how this played out. We didn't get a chance to see, if LN played Bloomington South. That could have helped decide what the Mr. Basketball vote would have been. So that's something to keep in mind, too, is we don't know, there was no tiebreaker, necessarily. And I think with Galloway, too, they could have been, potentially playing Carmel in the semi-state, which would have been a great game. I think, and not to say they would have just, those teams in the regional were good too, but I think everything kind of pointed to maybe seeing Culver and Carmel and then LN and Bloomington South. And, it makes me sad we didn't get to see those games because those would have been great games if they would have happened. But so keep that in mind too, is we don't know, that other than, some other years, definitely there's been those kind of tiebreaker type of games, and we didn't have those this year. And this year probably needed that, more than other years, because I think it was a really tight race this year. But, I think Leo probably has, you would say would have probably a slight advantage over Galloway and Perkins and potentially DeAndre Davis from Lawrence Central. I think he'd have a slight advantage over those guys.
Yeah, you mentioned the regions of the state and how it's probably to Anthony's benefit that Christian Lander is not in the voting this year, because down in Evansville, there's a section of that southern part of the state that you talked about. Probably he may have lost.
That's true too. That's a good point. And if if Lander could have reclassified before the season, I think he would have had a lot of support as well. And I was kind of surprised the Gatorade Player of the Year went to Trey Kaufman. They're not locked into being seniors like Mr. Basketball is. So it was surprising because I thought they would pick a senior. I kind of thought it'd be Leal or Galloway, and they went with Trey Kaufman. So that was interesting, I thought too, when you look at this race this year.
Kyle, I was shocked by that, to be honest with you. Not because he's not a great player. He is, obviously, but there are so many good seniors. You just mentioned two of them, and Tony Perkins and all those other guys as well. Nigel Pack. I mean, those guys are all really, really good. Had good seasons, but they surprised a lot of people going with a junior.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that too, and it probably locks him into being the guy next year as well. Maybe not locks him in, but makes him the front runner to win Gatorade again, because we've seen, I think it was maybe 4 times previously that it's happened, and all those guys previously had won the following year as well. So I was surprised by that. I wouldn't have thought Trey would be the pick, although I love his game and everything he does, but I didn't think they would take a junior. And you mentioned Pack and Davis, and I think those guys from Lawrence Central probably, when we look back at this, they're going to get overlooked maybe historically a little bit, because Lawrence North beat them 3 times. But, man, those guys the last 3 years were exceptional players at Lawrence Central. And, kind of got that program revived, and they just could not figure out a way to beat Lawrence North. And that was, they go 22-0, against everybody else, and 0-3 against Lawrence North. And that's such an odd thing to have happen. But man, those guys were so good, for the last 3 years to kind of get that thing going at Lawrence Central and generate a lot of excitement around that program as well.
Kyle, you mentioned one quick thing that's happened, 4 or 5 times before where juniors got that. Have any of those guys not won Mr. Basketball as a senior?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at that. I think they all did. When I looked at that, it was Jason Gardner, Damon Bailey, and gosh dang it, I can't remember the others right offhand right now. But it had been a while since it had happened. I think it maybe been 13 or 14 years. And gosh, maybe it was Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon may have been one of them too. So it was kind of a who's list when you looked at it, and all those guys went on to win Gatorade the next year, and I think won Mr. Basketball as well. So, I don't know if that necessarily means anything for next year because, we'll see how it plays out. Caleb First, I think, is a guy who also you need to put in that mix for Mr. Basketball. I love his, he's such a energetic, tough player, and really played, when they went head to head, I thought, First got the better end of that against Kaufman earlier this season. So,
I was really excited to see. Hey, Kyle, I was really excited to see those juniors play the seniors this year with First and Kaufman and Lander. I mean, that's 3 guys right there that I think could have carried. They could have possibly beat the seniors. I don't want to say easily, but it wouldn't have surprised me. That's for sure.
No, I would have loved to have seen that because I guarantee the seniors too would be tired of hearing about the juniors.
For sure. No doubt about it. I agree.
That's always, that's always fun because I remember when the 2011 and 12 guys played against each other, and the 11 guys were so sick of hearing about the junior guys, how good they were. And they just went all out. I think it was up at Kokomo. They played each other, and Cody Zeller, it's about 95 degrees in Kokomo's gym, and he's just playing, all out, and it was a great game. I think that's the one that went to sudden death overtime, and they finally ended it. But that's something I remember too. Is sometimes those seniors, if you're competitive enough, you're going to get sick of hearing about the other guys and want to go kick their butt. So I was looking forward to seeing how that would have played out as well the week leading up to the All-Star game.
Well, we got one more Flying Leary left next season up at Carmel, Kyle. So you get one more. You got one more Leary to cover.
Absolutely, that Carmel team, I tell you, that's they obviously had a big turnover from last year's roster, but that team really played well, and I wasn't completely surprised. I thought they would mesh together pretty well, and of course Ryan Osborne has done a great job there since Scott Hetty left, but. That team, if you wanted to get them, this year was probably the year, and not many people did. So that team's only going to be better, not only next year, but I think the year after that too. They've got a good base of players coming, and the beat goes on for the Cromwell Greyhounds for sure.
Kyle, I cannot thank you enough, man, for joining us here today as the All-Stars have been announced. Always love having you on, love talking to you. You are the authority when it comes to Indiana high school basketball, covering for the Indianapolis Star, and we appreciate you, man.
Well, I enjoy you guys having me on, and it's good to talk about basketball for sure to get our minds off other things. So I do appreciate you guys having me on, and best of luck to you both.
Absolutely, we'll do it again. So, thanks a lot,
okay.
Kyle. Kyle Neddenriep, the Indianapolis Star. This is Jim Coyle from Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary. Indiana Sports Beat is now a part of the Rivals Network. You can go to thehoosier.com to sign up. It's free. Catch the show there each day live or at your convenience. You can also like or follow us on Facebook, follow the show's rebroadcast anywhere you podcast. If we're not on a radio station where you live, we should be. Let your local station know they need to carry Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary, or simply go to thehoosier.com.